The sun was beginning to set in Manila, painting the sky with orange hues that contrasted with the imposing skyscrapers of the Philippine capital. Manny Pacquiao was driving his black Mercedes-Benz through the busy streets after a long day of political meetings and official commitments. His body still carried the fatigue of decades of fights in the ring, but his mind remained as sharp as ever, carefully observing the world around him as the driver navigated through the chaotic traffic. While stopping at a traffic light in the Quiapo district, something caught the former world champion's attention. On the sidewalk, near a small chapel dedicated to Santo Niño, an elderly man was sitting with his back against a peeling wall, his worn and dirty clothes revealing his homeless condition. There was something in the silent dignity of that man that deeply touched Manny's heart, reminding him of his own childhood in the impoverished streets of General Santos City. The traffic light turned green, but Manny asked the driver to stop the car. Ignoring the polite protests of his personal assistant, Juanito Mabunga, who reminded him of pending commitments, the former boxer got out of the vehicle and walked toward the elderly man. Under the curious gaze of passers-by who recognized the national celebrity, Manny approached with respect, noticing the details that spoke of a life of work and hardship. Calloused hands, a face marked by time and sun, and eyes that, despite everything, still held a spark of hope. The man, who would later introduce himself as Ernesto Balagtas, 72 years old, looked up in surprise when he realized who was standing before him. In his trembling hands, he held a small carved wooden amulet, a traditional Filipino patua that represented protection. Manny noticed that, despite his precarious situation, the gentleman kept a small leather suitcase worn by time at his side, as if carrying with him all the memories and possessions that remained from a life that had once been different. Night was beginning to fall over Manila, bringing with it temporary relief from the tropical heat that characterized the Philippines. The city lights twinkled like earthly stars, illuminating the path of Manny and Ernesto as they walked side by side. The former champion had dismissed his entourage, asking only that the driver meet them later, as he wanted to talk with Mr. Balagtas without the formality that normally surrounded him. Ernesto walked slowly, with a slight limp in his right leg, the result of a work accident at the Subic Bay shipyards decades ago. As he explained in a low voice to Manny, the contrast between the two men was evident to any observer, the former boxer wearing an impeccably cut Italian suit, and the elderly man in worn clothes that had been mended several times by skillful but resourceless hands. Manny led Ernesto to the Aristocrat, a traditional Filipino restaurant located on Roxas Boulevard, famous for its chicken adobo and pancit canton. The establishment, with more than 80 years of history, was frequented by both celebrities and ordinary families, maintaining its unpretentious charm that the former pugilist so appreciated. As they entered, the staff immediately recognized the national boxing legend, but also noticed his unusual companion. The maitre d' Ramon Tuazon hesitated momentarily upon seeing the homeless man beside the celebrity, but Manny's firm look left no doubt about his intentions. With professionalism, Ramon led them to a more private table with a view of Manila Bay where the lights of cargo ships shone in the distance like fireflies over the dark sea. Ernesto seemed out of place, looking around with a mixture of admiration and discomfort, his calloused hands restless on the immaculate white cloth napkin. The aroma of Filipino spices filled the environment, the mixture of garlic, saffron, pepper, and coconut vinegar that characterized the local cuisine, awakening memories in both Manny and Ernesto, who had not experienced a complete meal in such an environment for a long time. The curious glances from other customers were discreet but noticeable, while the former boxer treated the elderly man with the same deference he would show a foreign dignitary, demonstrating that true greatness is revealed in the treatment given to the most vulnerable. The meal began with Manny ordering traditional Filipino specialties, including sinigang na hipon, a sour soup with shrimp that was particularly comforting at any time of year. Ernesto's eyes lit up as he saw the dishes arriving at the table, especially when the waiter served the halo, a colorful dessert with sweet beans, fruits, jelly, and condensed milk over shaved ice. It had been decades since the elderly man had tasted this combination that had marked his childhood in the province of Pampanga, known as the culinary capital of the Philippines. As they savored the food, Manny carefully observed Ernesto's reactions, noting how the man ate with dignity and good manners, revealing an education that contrasted with his current condition. Between forkfuls, the elderly man occasionally touched the wooden pacquiao he carried with him, as if that small object were an anchor to distant memories. His trembling hands gained firmness when holding the cutlery, and his face, wrinkled by the Philippine sun, softened with each bite, as if each flavor brought back a little of the life he had lost. At a certain point during the meal, Ernesto took an old faded photograph from his small leather suitcase, showing it to Manny with a mixture of pride and sadness. In the image, yellowed by time, one could see a younger man wearing the Philippine Navy uniform next to a beautiful woman holding a small child. The former boxer understood without the need for words that he was looking at the story of a man who once had a family and a respectable career before life circumstances led him to the streets of Manila. The waiters kept the water glasses, always full, and served each new dish with reverence, not only due to the presence of the national celebrity, but also for the respect that Manny demonstrated for his guest. The restaurant manager, Teodoro Hidalgo, personally approached to ensure that everything was perfect, recognizing in the former champion's gesture the true Bayanihan spirit, the sense of community and mutual help deeply rooted in Filipino culture. Outside, some fans and curious onlookers had gathered, having discovered Pacquiao's presence in the restaurant. Among them, a young reporter from the Manila Bulletin, Liza Reyes, discreetly observed the scene through the establishment's windows, realizing that she was witnessing something deeper than a simple meal. She was seeing a silent lesson in humanity, being taught by a man who, despite fame and fortune, had never forgotten his humble origins in the streets of General Santos City. The conversation between Manny and Ernesto flowed naturally, without the need for forced words or formalities. The former boxer listened with genuine interest as the elderly man shared fragments of his story. His youth as a sailor navigating the Philippine archipelago, his marriage to his late wife Ligaya, whose name meant happiness in Tagalog, and the years dedicated to raising his only son, Angelo, who had emigrated to the United States 2 decades ago and lost contact with his father after a series of family disagreements. Ernesto recounted how he had lost everything during the Asian financial crisis in the late 1990s, when the small naval repair business he had established after leaving the Navy failed due to accumulated debts and the deteriorating health of Ligaya, who succumbed to cancer without having access to adequate treatments. The sequence of personal tragedies culminated in the loss of his home in Tondo, one of the poorest neighborhoods in Manila, forcing him to live on the streets of the capital for the past 5 years, surviving on small occasional jobs and the charity of others. What impressed Manny the most was not just the difficulties faced by Ernesto, but the absence of bitterness in his narrative. The elderly man spoke of his life with the serenity of someone who had accepted the blows of fate without losing dignity, keeping alive the philosophy of bahala na, the Filipino resilience in the face of adversity. Meanwhile, customers around them tried to disguise their curiosity, some taking discreet photos with their cell phones, others whispering theories about who this simple man sharing a table with the national idol might be. The night was advancing and the restaurant was beginning to empty, but Manny seemed oblivious to time, completely absorbed in Ernesto's story. The former champion recognized in that narrative elements of his own journey: the extreme poverty, the nights sleeping in cardboard boxes on the streets of General Santos City, the daily struggle for survival before boxing opened the doors to a new reality for him. The difference was that, while he had had the opportunity to overcome his circumstances, men like Ernesto remained invisible to a society increasingly indifferent to the suffering of others. Teodoro, the manager, respectfully approached to inform them that the restaurant was about to close, but Manny asked them to remain open for a while longer, promising to generously compensate the staff for the inconvenience. Outside, reporter Liza Reyes continued her vigil, now accompanied by a photographer colleague from the newspaper, both realizing that they were witnessing more than a simple story of charity. They were seeing a moment of genuine human connection that transcended social barriers. When they finally left the aristocrat, dawn had already settled over Manila, bringing with it the rare quietness in the metropolis of more than 13 million inhabitants. Manny's driver waited patiently in the parking lot, showing no surprise when the former boxer informed him that they would take Ernesto to the Peninsula Hotel in Makati, one of the most luxurious establishments in the Philippine capital. The contrast between the marble and mirrors lobby of the five-star hotel and Ernesto's humble figure could not be more evident, generating curious looks from the reception staff when Manny personally requested a suite for his companion. The reception manager, Maricel Domingo, an elegant woman in her 40s, immediately recognized the national Pac-Man, and after a brief hesitation upon observing Ernesto, quickly mobilized her team to attend to the celebrity's request with discretion and efficiency. Within minutes, a room was prepared and a set of new clothes was provided through the hotel's concierge service, demonstrating the power that the Pacquiao name still exerted in the Philippines, even after his transition from sports to politics. Ernesto seemed disoriented by the sudden change in his situation, his eyes scanning the luxurious environment with a mixture of admiration and discomfort. His calloused hands hesitantly touched the high thread-count Egyptian sheets and the soft towels, as if they were objects from another world. The elderly man held his small leather suitcase firmly against his chest, as if fearing that someone might take away the few material memories he still possessed from his previous life. Manny explained to Mr. Balagtas that he could stay at the hotel for as long as necessary until they could find a more permanent solution for his situation. The former boxer had made a decision while they were talking during dinner. He would use his contacts and resources to try to locate Angelo, Ernesto's distant son in the United States, believing that family reconciliation could be the first step in restoring the elderly man's dignity. Additionally, he promised that his foundation, the Manny Pacquiao Foundation, would ensure complete medical assistance and a suitable place for Ernesto to live, regardless of the outcome of the search for his son. Before saying goodbye, Manny noticed silent tears streaming down Ernesto's wrinkled face, who could not find words to express his gratitude. The former world boxing champion, who had faced the most fearsome fighters in rings around the world, felt deeply touched by that silent display of emotion. At that moment, it was not the influential politician or the sports celebrity who was there, but simply Emmanuel Dapidran Pacquiao, the boy from General Santos City, who had never forgotten what it meant to go hungry and not have a roof over his head. News of Manny's gesture spread quickly through Philippine media. Reporter Liza Reyes published a cover story in the Manila Bulletin titled "The True Champion Pacquiao and the Lesson of Humanity in the Streets of Manila," accompanied by photos capturing the genuine interaction between the former boxer and the elderly man during dinner. Within hours, the story went viral on social media, being shared by thousands of Filipinos and generating a wave of positive comments about how the gesture represented the true Filipino spirit of bayanihan and damayan, community compassion, and solidarity. Meanwhile, Ernesto was experiencing a transformation in his appearance and state of mind. After a hot bath, the first in a bathtub in many years, and wearing new clothes provided by the hotel, the elderly man seemed rejuvenated. The peninsula's barber had trimmed his white beard and cut his grey hair, revealing the distinctive features of a man who, in his youth, had been considered one of the most respected sailors in his naval unit. The hotel staff, initially apprehensive, soon became enchanted with the education and fascinating stories that Ernesto shared about the various islands of the Philippine archipelago he had visited during his years in the Navy. Behind the scenes, the Manny Pacquiao Foundation team was working intensely. Cherry Santos, the organization's executive director, mobilized contacts in Philippine consulates in the United States and person-finding agencies to try to locate Angelo Balagtas, last registered as a resident in San Diego, California. Simultaneously, social workers from the foundation were preparing documents to regularize Ernesto's situation. who for years had not possessed valid documents or access to government benefits to which he was entitled as a military veteran and elderly person. Soir D. The third day of his stay at the hotel, Ernesto received a visit from a private doctor sent by Manny for a complete checkup. Dr. Rafael Macaraheg, a geriatric specialist from the prestigious medical city, diagnosed several treatable conditions that had been neglected during the years of life on the streets: hypertension, early diabetes, and a cataract that significantly compromised his vision. A treatment plan was immediately established, with all costs covered by the former boxer's foundation, giving Ernesto renewed hope of recovering not only his physical health, but also his independence. The story continued to gain national repercussion, with political commentators observing how Manny's spontaneous gesture contrasted with the calculated image of many Filipino politicians who did charity only when cameras were present. In an interview with ABS-CBN, the country's main television network, Senator Pacquiao minimized his own merits, stating that he had simply followed Christian teachings and the values that his mother, Dionysia "Mommy D. Pacquiao," had instilled in him since childhood. When God blesses us, it is not for us to become selfish, but to be channels of blessings for others. A week after the initial encounter, Cherry Santos hurriedly entered Manny's office in the Philippine Senate, located in the government complex of Pasay City. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she held a tablet in her hands. The foundation's executive director brought surprising news. After days of intense searches and multiple contacts with the Filipino-American community in California, they had finally located Angelo Balagtas. Ernesto's son worked as a nurse in a San Diego hospital, and upon being informed about his father's situation, was visibly emotional, revealing that he had spent years trying to locate the elderly man without success after his mother's death. The foundation team immediately organized a video call between father and son, a moment of intense emotion that took place in Ernesto's suite at the Peninsula Hotel. The elderly man, now with a renewed appearance thanks to medical care and proper nutrition, could barely contain his tears upon seeing his son's face on the computer screen. Angelo, a middle-aged man with features that clearly resembled those of Ernesto in his youth, explained that he had lost contact with his father after a family disagreement, aggravated by distance and communication difficulties. For years he had sent money to the old address in Tondo, unaware that his father had lost his home and was living on the streets of Manila. Manny, discreetly observing the family reunion, felt a deep satisfaction in realizing that his impulsive gesture of helping a stranger was having developments that went far beyond a simple meal or temporary accommodation. The former boxer, who had grown up in a united family despite extreme poverty, understood the inestimable value of family ties and how they could be a fundamental foundation for rebuilding lives shattered by adversity. Angelo announced during the call that he was arranging documents to bring his father to live with his family in the United States, where he could receive continuous medical care and enjoy the company of grandchildren he had never met. The news brought a renewed sparkle to Ernesto's eyes, who held the wooden patua in his hands, as if that amulet had in some mystical way contributed to this turnaround in his destiny. The elderly man, always reserved in his emotions, allowed himself to smile broadly, revealing the indomitable spirit that had kept him alive during the difficult years on the streets. The repercussion of the story reached international dimensions when media outlets such as CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera echoed the case, highlighting not only Manny's humanitarian gesture, but also how Ernesto's story reflected social challenges faced by elderly people in many developing countries. Social analysts pointed out how globalization and mass migration had fragmented traditional families in the Philippines, leaving many elderly people vulnerable without the community support that had characterized Filipino society in previous generations. 3 months after the initial encounter in the streets of Quiapo, Ninoy Aquino International Airport in Manila was unusually busy for a regular weekday. A small entourage waited in the international departure area. Manny Pacquiao, some members of his foundation, reporter Liza Reyes, who had followed the entire story, and Ernesto Balagtas, unrecognizable compared to the man found on the streets months before. The elderly man now displayed an upright posture, well-fitting clothes and a new pair of glasses that corrected his vision after successful cataract surgery. More notable than his physical appearance was the transformation in his countenance, which now radiated hope and restored dignity. The last few months had been intense for Ernesto. In addition to the medical treatments that stabilized his health conditions, he had gone through a process of regularizing his documentation, including obtaining a passport and the necessary visas for his trip to the United States. The Manny Pacquiao Foundation had also ensured that he retroactively received retirement benefits as a Navy veteran to which he was entitled, but had never been able to access due to bureaucratic complications and his situation as a homeless person. The farewell at the airport was brief, but charged with emotion. Manny embraced Ernesto with genuine affection, as if he were saying goodbye to an old friend and not someone he had met only 3 months ago. The former boxer gave the elderly man a small gift, a box containing a new patuá made of noble wood, carved by artisans from Paete, a Filipino town famous for its traditional sculptures. The amulet symbolized protection for the journey and permanent connection with his Filipino roots, even when on the other side of the world. As Ernesto walked toward the boarding gate, he turned one last time to wave to Manny and the small group accompanying him. His face showed a mixture of gratitude and serenity, the expression of a man who, after years of trials, had finally found his way back home. Local news cameras recorded the moment, but for those involved, this was not just a media story of charity, but a powerful reminder of how small gestures of compassion could trigger profound transformations in lives seemingly forgotten by society. Chacho. The flight that would take him to San Diego, Ernesto reflected on the extraordinary series of events triggered by a simple gesture of human recognition on the streets of Manila. The elderly man understood that his story was not just about a former boxing champion helping a homeless person, but about how the true Filipino spirit of Bayanihan, the community coming together to help its most vulnerable members, remained alive in the hearts of people like Manny Pacquiao. As the plane took off, leaving behind the lights of Manila that now looked like earthly stars, Ernesto firmly held the two patuas, the old one, witness to his years of difficulty, and the new one, symbol of a renewed future, understanding that sometimes true wealth lies in the human connections that sustain us in the darkest moments of life.
If you like this kind of story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next videos.